welcome to our podcast, Disrupting the Dominoes. I'm Arelene Limas, the CEO of PAVE Prevention. And when we say disrupting the dominoes, we're talking about disrupting the dominoes of violence. And those dominoes start to fall from microaggression to full-blown physical event. So in our podcast, we're discussing different attacks, different ways to address the epidemic of violence in our society, in our world. And we have a really exceptional guest today. I'm very excited to share that our guest is the current CEO of SafeSport, has been the vice president tasked for the Boys and Girls Club to keep children and clubs safe, and also the former executive director for the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So, I mean, a lifetime, a career lifetime, definitely, of trying to keep our children safe. And I am so very honored to be able to have a conversation with our guest today. Colón, welcome to our podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Arelene. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. We've had numerous conversations, and SafeSport is just a program, an organization that has to succeed in my mind. It has to succeed. So I'm really excited to support you and your efforts there in any way that I can.
Great. Awesome.
All right. So could you just share for those people who are watching our podcast and maybe come to our viewership solely on something like interpersonal violence or domestic violence or gender-based violence, could you just share a little bit how the idea of SafeSport came about and what you're tasked to do? So tell us about the Center for SafeSport.
Sure. So the U.S. Center for SafeSport, we're a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary, which is exciting when you think about when the center opened its doors, back in 2017. During a time where, the world was watching sports, specifically gymnastics. This was a time where, Larry Nassar was in jail. Several women had come forward. I mean, since then, we've had over, 100 women come forward and tell their stories about the abuse that they suffered. And, at that time, the public, the athletes, organizations, Congress was like, enough is enough. There's got to be a place that can help people who experience this, but is going to hold abusers and organizations accountable. And so the Center for SafeSport was born. When we opened in 2017, we had a simple mission, and still do, right? To make sure that athletes are safe, supported, and strengthened throughout their experience in sport. Whether that is a 5-year-old who is just entering hockey, or a 12-year-old who is on a traveling soccer team, or for that matter, a 40-year-old who is on a bowling league, right? So it's really making sure that all athletes, as they go through their sports journey, wherever they are in it, can feel that they're safe and that their organizations are protecting them and have their best interest in heart. And so the organization is not only responsible for making sure that we hold those who abuse others accountable, but we're also responsible for developing education and policies and training every national governing body within the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Movement on how to interact with youth athletes and setting baselines and standards for how they interact with athletes in general. So it's an organization that, as you said before, has to succeed. And that's because, one, there's just a great need, but, there has to be a place where athletes can go to demand accountability, and in some instances demand change, right? To make sure that at their experience and those that are coming up behind them are safe.
Yeah. I mean, there was so much excitement, definitely in my circles, that there was going to be an organization, an institution that would educate, investigate, and adjudicate, when things happen within the sporting world. So yeah, it's definitely an organization that has to work, as I said, and I'm so excited, for you to share what the Center for SafeSport is doing, where it's going. So I'm going to skip ahead a couple questions because you touched on something when you brought the outrage that at least this country, if not the world, was feeling when the information came out about the gymnasts. And I think we're in agreement that sport is in a unique position to usher in social change. It has on numerous occasions, right? It has for women's rights. It has in race discussions. Sport is such a fantastic social motivator. So do you see the things that the Center for Safe Sport is doing and what it's ushering in? Do you see that helping society on a whole, leading the way through sport again to, I believe, the playing field and the gym and the training facility, that's the athlete's workplace. So I'm tying this into what PAVE does, which is, trying to create safer workplaces. Do you see the Center for Safe Sport and the things it's trying to do contributing to that social change, just like sports has done in the past?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Right. Because it's all about culture change. When you think about where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, lots of the things that we expect, not only as athletes, as folks who are involved with sport, but just as human beings, right? The things that we are requiring, right, that be changed, that be addressed in workplaces, in social gatherings, in sports environments. All of that is starting to change. And I'd like to think that the Center for Safe Sport is playing a role in that because, one, I think we kind of jump-started some of the accountability pieces, right, with governing bodies. And when you think about just the Olympics and the Paralympics, by itself, 11 to 14 million people is a lot of people. That represents like 4% of the entire US population, right? Like that is a huge number of people who are now exposed to understanding what sound policies look like, understanding what safe sports environments and settings should look like, and then making sure that people are being held accountable to those standards. And what we see happening is that there's going to be spillover, right? Just because I am I'm part of a local volleyball team doesn't mean that I'm not also a teacher or involved with my church or part of my HOA, whatever it might be. Everybody, we live in this sort of like ecosystem within an ecosystem, and all the things that we are seeing that's happening in sports, they're leading the way. And, a big part of that, I think Safe Sport's a part of that, but an even greater part of that are the athletes that have just stood up and said, not anymore, enough is enough. And so we're not just looking at, oh, it's not enough, it's not okay in sport, it's just not okay. And, I think back to the games in Tokyo when Simone Biles was like, nope, I don't care what you guys say, I'm taking care of me first, right? And there was just a stream of athletes who were like, you know what, she's right. We're taking a break. We're taking a mental break. We're taking to stock of where we are, and we're taking care of ourselves first. Even though, yes, we are here representing our country, we're at the top of our game, we also need to take care of ourselves and make sure that our workplaces, right, are healthy for us. So I see that just really impacting all facets of life. And it's really, really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I did some presentations after Simone, made that statement, that bold statement. And I think it goes along with everything that PAVE tries to impart in our training, right? Being able to set a boundary, being able to use your voice, being able to identify what self-care you need. So yeah, that's a perfect example. And I will share for me, having the experience that I have had as an athlete and as a coach, I find that it resonates on people that I speak to when I discuss violence in the workplace, of using an example of an athlete who is dealing with violence in their workplace. It's very clear to see why productivity may have slipped or why performance may have dropped. And then it kind of sets up a different light bulb for them. They can the world just sees athletes and the realm that they play in a different light. So I think you are spot on that the things that the Center of Safe Sport is trying to usher in really can have a huge impact on society as a whole. So yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's so exciting. It's like finally, right? Because athletes are not just their athletic selves, right? They're a whole person. And sometimes I think we put people and we have this view of people, and this is all that they do. And they're just so much more than that. And it is just heartwarming, right? To see people stand up for themselves and be like, no, I'm so much more than that.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So I know that, and I'm sure this is not new to you, of course, but I'll share with our viewers and our listeners, there are concerns around safe sport and how safe sport can do its job efficiently and to the extent that it needs to, if the funding that you're receiving is still coming from the group that you're in a sense supposed to police. So if you want to shed some light on that, where is the Center for Safe Sport on that? How are your funding sources? Are they getting better? And I know it's a tough question, and I know the answer is not easy. So please share what you can with us.
Sure. The issue of funding for the center has always been a challenge. When we opened back in 2017, and I joined in 2019, but it's my understanding that conversations were, how are we going to fund this organization and how much money do they need and how many reports of abuse can we possibly get, right? How busy are they going to be anyway? And the organization, exactly, you're laughing because this is like, it was nuts, right? I don't know who they had this conversation with or who they tasked with coming up with this number, but they were like, 60 is probably the right number. They'll probably get 60 cases a year. So because of that, we were staffed and we were funded for 60 cases a year. And for reference, we got almost 300 reports that year and are now getting over 100 reports a week. So it is not, it was never really staffed or funded the way that it really should have been from the very beginning. The other issue that you pointed out is that most of the money was coming from the Olympic and Paralympic movement. We built the Olympic and Paralympic movement for several years because there was no other funding stream available to us. And so, that was 2017, 2018, and most of 2019. But we all recognize, including Congress, that it was problematic, right? And even though the USOPC and the NGBs did not have any access or authority over any of our investigations or our operations, the perception from the public was just that, right? And so we're like, look, we've got to make sure this is really clean so that there's no questions about it, but also, we need to build trust with athletes. And that's not a great way to do that, right? If people think that we're being paid by the very people that we're investigating, right? And so in 2020, the Empowering Olympic and Amateur Athletes Act was passed. This was a game changer for us as an organization, not only because it codified a lot of the things we were doing specifically around policies and auditing of national governing bodies, being able to report interference to Congress, but it also solidified funding. And what that bill says is that the USOPC is required to provide the center with $20 million annually for our existence. And while the funding is still coming from the USOPC, there is no negotiation. There is no conversation around how much do you need and what you're doing with it, right? It is Congress told you to pay that, period. And so for us, while we're trying to diversify funding to help support that organization long term, this was just another step in the right direction to make sure that the NGBs, the USOPC, and frankly, those who, involved with the Olympic and Paralympic Committee had zero oversight, right? And had zero influence over how much money we were getting and how we were choosing to spend it. And so I think that was a huge moment for the center because one, it helped set us up and really grow into the organization that we are today. We were able to hire the investigators that we need, expanded the outreach and engagement staff that we needed, something that we weren't able to do before that bill was passed.
So Dries, how many investigators does the U.S. Center for Safe Sport have now?
If you would have asked me that question in 2019, it would have been 6. Today, the organization has a total of 117 staff right now. Mm-hmm. We are in a constant state of hiring, so as most nonprofits are these days. So about 117 staff total. More than 60 of those people are solely dedicated to response and resolution. So that's everyone who's answering the phones, who's taking the reports through the website, who are processing allegations through our intake system, through our investigators, to supervisors who review all those cases. all the way up to the attorneys who are drafting the opinions and sanctions. So it is almost like a small organization within itself, and in fact is larger today than the entire organization was when I joined.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome. It's awesome and it's sad, right? It's incredible that you're able to put that type of work forward, but I'm sorry that you have to put that work forward.
Yeah, and you know, it's people always ask us, well, is that it? Like, do you have enough? Are you where you need to be? For today, sure, right? But what we know and what we're seeing is that we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth in reports every quarter over quarter growth that that we've seen for the last year and a half, 2 years since COVID started. And any other organization or business, quarter over quarter growth would be amazing, right? For us, not so much. So, we've, really focused on making sure that we've got the right efficiencies in place to make sure that we can move investigations through at as fast as possible, right? To make sure we get resolution as quickly as they can, but also making sure that those investigations are thorough and neutral. But as we get more and more reports in, we're continuing to hire because there's only so much that you can kind of throw right at an increased caseload. And that's efficiencies, that is adding more staff, or you make the decision that you're just going to be slower. And that, unfortunately, that's not an option for us. Right. Because, and it's no secret that for years, a lot of the criticism that the center was getting is because we were slow. It was taking months, maybe years, right, for people to get their cases through the system, which was unacceptable. And so now that we're in this place where we are fully staffed, sort of, but also have all these processes in place, we're moving through cases at a greater speed and efficiency than we ever have before. And as a result, we don't even have a backlog anymore, right? So that is the type of work that we're trying to do, but we're also planning for the future because we know, unfortunately, that we're going to still get reports, right? Which the thing is, that's not a bad thing. It's great that people are finally coming forward, sharing their stories and understanding that they're going to get a fair shake from an organization. That's great. And we don't want to stop that. We just have to be ready to respond.
Yeah. Great. So I know that you've been in the news, you've been quoted in the news and interviewed in the last week or so on what I'm sure is a very frustrating topic to have to discuss. So SafeSport gets a report, does its investigation, bans an individual, and that individual just goes to a different sporting organization outside of the Olympic movement, but still within sport and dealing with athletes, and has continued success without really any repercussions. Now, they're not in the Olympic movement, but maybe they're in AAU, or maybe they're in, a high school system of sport or something like that. Can you explain to us why that happens? And is there anything we can do to help facilitate change there?
Yeah, it is one of the most frustrating things with this work because, this organization was set up to remove people from sport that shouldn't be involved with athletes and minors, right? We wanted to make sure that we remove bad actors. And we've been doing that, right? To date, we've removed upwards of 1,600 people from sport. And those people, unfortunately, in many instances, can go over to a local school or a local college or university or parks and rec system and continue to coach, right? And interact with kids because there's a gap that exists in this country in sport and with the law. Our organization is it's very clear what our jurisdiction is, and that's the Olympic and Paralympic Movement. But we have zero jurisdiction over schools, over local parks and rec. And many of these organizations are also very disjointed, right? Where you don't have a central body who's managing a lot of this. And so it's easy for people to kind of bounce around. I mean, think about with teachers, years ago, where you could go and be a teacher somewhere in the Northeast and, something bad happened, you scoot on down to the South, right? And as laws are trying to catch up to close some of those loopholes, whether they be through background checks or making sure there's comprehensive screening policies, all that is good, but you've got to, I think that every organization who's, particularly those who are dealing with minors, owes it to the kids, the families, and their communities to really do thorough checks of all these folks. And that includes checking the centralized disciplinary database that the center operates. That database was set up to be a public information tool, right? So that they know that if Jerice Colón is not allowed to be in sport, then I can go up and look at her and say, you know what, this is not the right person. This is not the kind of person we want with our kids. And we can stop that from happening. But that also that's happening on a case-by-case basis, an organization-by-organization basis. I think for us to really shore up those gaps, we need these larger organizations, so the AAUs, the NCAAs, large school systems, right? To say, look, enough is enough. We're going to abide by, and we're going to recognize the center's sanctions and apply those to our hiring practices and our volunteer recruitment. And, I think until then, unless there's some sort of congressional action, which, I was just on the Hill last week, and this was a huge topic of conversation. How can we make sure that these organizations are following this and not passing people from one place to another? Because there have been far too many instances where the center will ban someone from sport, and then they get arrested 2 years later, right? Because they've done the exact same thing in another environment.
That's terrible. That is so frustrating for me. I know within the sport of Taekwondo, there are several coaches that have received suspensions from the U.S. Center for SafeSport and are still running martial arts schools and still coaching in Olympic and Paralympic events. So it is very frustrating. Or in other countries who've left the U.S. and are now coaching at high levels for other countries. Is there ever a way that SafeSport information or suspensions can be connected to a background check, or is that too much of a liability for the U.S. Center?
So we've had a lot of conversation with background check companies to do just that. We are, as a growing organization, we're also strengthening our technology, right? We did, like, the way that the CDD was built in 2018 would not have really facilitated something like that. And so as we are strengthening our internal infrastructure around technology, one of the things that we're, seriously taking a look at is how can we build it in a way so that background check companies can kind of get like an automatic feed, basically. So there's some things internally that we've got to work out, but that is long-term goal, right? For us to be able to share that information. But I think in the meantime, there's a couple of things that, as parents, right, and community members can also do, because by simply asking your sports organization or your kids' team or your community if they've gone through SafeSport training, right, if they've checked the CDD for new volunteers and coaches, if they have comprehensive screening practices in place, the power of parents is tremendous. And I think if, as parents, we can start to put some pressure on the organizations that we're paying, right, to keep our kids safe, then, they will have, that much more responsibility and just incentive, right, to start doing some of these things. And we've started seeing it already, where parents are like, look, you guys need to do this. Either it's training, or if it's background checks, whatever it might be. But, to date, the center has relationships with 900 plus organizations that are outside of the Olympic movement, because those organizations said, this is really valuable. And we want our coaches, we want our parents, we want our athletes to understand what SafeSport is. We want them to understand how to report abuse. We want to understand how to prevent it. And this is the tool for us to do that. So I think that also is growing, right? And we've got a lot of momentum there, but there's still a lot of work to be done because there are so many organizations that really don't have anything at all.
Yeah. Thank you for outlining that for us. And I look forward to the day when you're able to get the information out on predatory individuals to as many avenues, and it's accepted by as many organizations and reporting organizations as possible. So this leads me to kind of my next topic. You will be a guest and a participant in our summit, the first ever, from what I can tell, a summit on reducing violence in the workplace. And, when I first brought this up to my team, they were like, well, is this just a soft spot for you, in sport? Is this just because this is a soft spot, you want someone from sport there? No, I think it's really important that corporation leaders, decision makers in healthcare, hospitality, emergency preparedness, they hear the path that you've been on, and they hear your voice on how you are trying to educate and administering educational tools, on how you are investigating, and then how are you working through that process to adjudicate. I think that there can be smaller versions of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport in every corporation's HR department. And, PAVE prevention looks to kind of usher a new day in when dealing with those things. So, we're excited to have you join us at the summit. And how do you feel Safe Sport fits into a summit on reducing the violence in the workplace?
Well, I mean, I think you said it best earlier, like this is the athlete's workplace. It is the gyms where they practice. It's the competitions where they're competing. It is how they're traveling to and from those things. And the other athletes on the team, they're their coworkers, right? So I think it is a natural fit, although I think it's probably something like, wait a minute, how does sport fit into this? But I think it also goes to this ongoing conversation we have about culture change, right? And how sport can start leading the way in a lot of different unconventional areas. And workplace violence is one of them. I mean, the majority of the reports that we're getting, they're happening, during practices, during competitions, during the workday, right? During their workday. And so, the things that we are able to learn, right? And how people are interacting with each other, what types of things are happening and how they're being responded to on the ground, and then what work is being done to prevent is hugely important. I think when the people think about the Center for Safe Sport, it's just, oh, you guys deal with sexual abuse. That's it, right? And we are so much more than that. A good chunk of the cases that we are starting to see now are largely focused on emotional and physical abuse. And that is, people who are being violent towards one another, threats of violence, really just bullying and just mean-spirited behavior. The same thing that you, particularly now as we're coming out of this pandemic, which I think has just, raised the threat level to 10, right? All of those things I think are connected, and we can all learn from different industries and how we're approaching all of this. Because again, your employee might also be, a coach for the local volleyball team, right? You're like, it's all connected. So I'm very excited to join the conversation.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that the Center for Safe Sport is just so much more than just a sexual assault, investigating a sexual assault. That's kind of what I get when I say I'm trying to reduce workplace violence. Well, we get sexual harassment training. It's much more than just dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace. It's dealing with the microaggressions that lead up to something bigger. It's dealing with the gaslighting that makes the culture or the cohesiveness of the team not be what it should be, not be as productive as it should be. It's the 3 individuals that continue to come 15 minutes late to the meeting that you've called. It's those type of things that we need to start discussing if we're really going to make workplaces healthier and safer and more productive. As the U.S. Center for Safe Sport is much more, as you said, that's how we view our programming from PAVE prevention as well. So let me ask you, are there any new initiatives or anything you'd like to share about what the U.S. Center for Safe Sport is doing?
Well, a couple of things. One, we just released our impact report, which is a retrospective over the last 5 years. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that to kind of see, where we started and then where we're headed. I mentioned a few moments ago around how we're seeing more cases around emotional and physical abuse misconduct. And we don't know a whole lot about this in sport because it's just gone largely underreported or unreported, and it's scattered across the country. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is, one, to help understand what the true landscape looks like with emotional abuse within sport, but also to begin to help organizations, particularly NGBs, to be able to manage those things, whether they're through investigation or for the training, but also developing content specifically for that, because we do think that that is where we're going to see a sizable number of our reports going to be connected to. And so, we didn't have the opportunity as an organization to get ahead of sexual abuse in sport, right? We came in after the fact. We've got an opportunity now to get ahead of some of this as we're starting to learn and understand what the behavior looks like. So that is really, really exciting for us. I guess the other thing is, as an organization, we just finished our, I think, third year of auditing national governing bodies, and we started to publish the results online, something that we've never done before. And so we're going to be doing more of that, but also we're starting these random audits of governing bodies so that we can just pop in, see how things are going, and help them along the way. And so, we had our first year of that last year, which I think went pretty well. And so we're going to be doing more of that, because what's happening on the ground is, I think, the missing piece to a lot of the work that we've been doing.
So when you're doing these, I'll say scores for, like, say, an NGB or something, is USOPC taking that into account as far as for funding and things like that? Or how is that kind of evaluation or score? Or is it just information that they should use to get better, to be better?
Well, so it's information they use to get better, right? Because we're not in the business of just certifying NGBs. We want them to be successful, but we want them to be better, right? And so that's the number one goal there. Part of it, though, is with USOPC's audit and compliance function, they do take in our audit scores into account when they're considering certification. And so there's a big driver, right, for governing bodies to do well on the audit, and to make sure that they have all the policies, particularly SafeSport policies and practices in place, to make sure they continue to be part of the Olympic and Paralympic movement. So we don't tie it to funding at all. One, because we don't bill the NGBs anymore, right? So that's not really our thinking. But I would imagine that as an organization, and I'm sure with you as well, like, you think about things like insurance a lot, right? It's hard to get insured as a Center for Safe Sport. And I think it's hard for organizations to get insured, but the more that you can show that you're getting better, that you have policies in place, I would imagine that your insurance will start to reflect that as well. So I think that while it's not a direct financial incentive, I do think that that's part of it, right? That we can, as we look at, how the Center for Safe Sport impacts lots of things as part of an organization, and there's lots of tools and carrots, right, to make sure people are doing the right thing.
Great. Yeah, we're really at PAVE, we're really focused now on an organizational assessment tool that we're developing to kind of identify precursors to a violent culture, or what type of things are happening that would create a culture of violence, or even microaggressions within an organization. So we're really excited about that tool. And we envision it much like you're saying, that whatever score is generated, it may help with insurance or other things that corporation may be dealing with. So yeah, very cool. I really like the idea that you are doing the drop-ins and also the deeper evaluations of the NGBs. For our listeners, the NGB is the national governing body. So like USA Gymnastics, USA Taekwondo, USA Basketball, that's the NGB, the national governing body.
I get wrapped up in those acronyms, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, no. This is the question I ask everyone who's a guest on our podcast, and this is our last one, and we'll wrap it up. This has been really an awesome conversation. So if you could have the audience of one person, if you could sit down in front of someone and you felt that if I just have a conversation with this person, they could really move our movement forward. They could really move our cause forward. Who would that be and why?
Ooh, that's good question. There's so many that I would like, it'd be great if I got to talk to this person, right? Like, I think, does everybody say Michelle Obama?
Yeah. Yes.
I think for me, one of the areas that we just see as important is just trying to get messaging out, right? And helping people understand what we do and why. And so I think if I could talk to anybody about moving movement forward, I think I'd probably, could I pull a group together?
Sure.
I'd pull a group together of like all of the like large corporate entities that are sponsoring athletes, right? Because they've got access to really big stars, but they also have this amazing way of reaching their consumers, right? Which is also athletes. And so I just think about like, what if every person who bought like a Nike, right, was like, oh, I can take free SafeSport training. Like, I would just think about like people who have the leverage, right, to get to the people that we're trying to get to most. And that's kids and parents, right? And those are athletes. So maybe that's not the best person, not really a person, but like an entity. But if I could do that, I think that we could really be a game changer.
All right. So Nike, Adidas, Puma, Reebok, all of you, you've heard Athleta, all of you guys, right? A little coupon that says they get 15% off if they go through SafeSport training on their next item that they purchase from you guys. It's a win-win.
There it is.
Wow. Jerice, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. This has been great. I hope it's been as enjoyable for you because it's been really enjoyable for me. So thank you for that.
This has been fantastic. Thanks so much for inviting me, Arelene.
Okay. So, wow, what an awesome episode of Disrupting the Dominoes of Violence, PAVE Prevention's podcast. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard today, please subscribe. Check out our website. We've got a great newsletter that comes out. Again, thank you, Jerice. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.